It's so good to be back, Craig. Freight expectations. The people have been clamoring, screaming, and all we can do is give them what they want. It's great to see you.
We are here to serve, Matt. That's 100%. What we do here at Freight Expectations, and talk about the leading stories of the week. I want to talk about Delilah's Law and the State of the Union address, because I think that is
got it right here.
Most important and is the most transformative piece of legislation since deregulation to hit trucking, if it passes. So let's talk about what this law is. The president, by the way, have we had a State of the Union where trucking was mentioned?
I think every State of the Union should have it, but I don't think we have. It's not very often. We talk about the things that make everything possible, everything at your doorstep or at your shelves, all comes on a truck. And it's nice to see the president kind of tip his hat to the wonderful world of transportation and logistics.
There has been no more in the last 12 months. There has been so much attention on the trucking industry. You know, it's the fraud, it's the immigration issues, it's the, pervasiveness. You've got mainstream media now reporting, even what I call more neutral media sites are starting, like News Nation, which is sort of in the middle. It's not as right leaning as what Fox is. And then you get like the Turning Point, which is even more right.
And they're doing exposés on transportation now, which is phenomenal.
It is pervasive. It's happened across the country. I've been doing this, I've been in this industry as you have our whole lives.
We never had a chance.
But, I have ran a media business in trucking since 2016. And, it always felt like a product or an industry that nobody really cared about. And now, it's a niche product having a media business that covers trucking, and now it's front and center of so many national conversations.
It just shows the story that people actually do care how things get to their houses and how things get delivered every single day.
I think it's that. I also think it's ground center of a lot of the social and economic issues in the country.
We're the tip of the spear for everything. I couldn't agree with you more.
And I think the reason is that, if you go back to the reason Donald Trump was elected, a lot of his base was because there was a lot of angry people that were angry at the direction of the economy, felt like they had missed out on, this massive economic boom that had taken place with globalization. There's also a lot of anger over sort of the social fabric of the country. Felt like it was going very progressive, and that, if you were a Christian, you were, you're supposed to sort of support every religion except Christianity, as sort of the general sense for a lot of Christians. And so I think there was a lot of sort of pent up anger. But what's happened right now in trucking is that it's sort of ground zero for a much bigger set of conversations taking place across the country, which is this concept that you have blue collar labor, white collar labor, you have the powers in government, you have the institutions, and then you have the working man. And there's this sense among people who have been truck drivers for many years is they're getting phased out because the institutions are out to get them. It's the government colluding with the ATA, and some of that we know to be true. But there's also a sense that's much broader than that. And I think that's why trucking is ground zero. And now, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, is the reason that I think the administration gets such a pass on the immigration story in trucking is because they're able to shape it as a safety story. And that's what Delilah's story is all about.
Yeah, we have been at war with the American trucker for 46 years. And what we're now finding is that war is coming to the backyards and to every community in the country where people are dying in these catastrophic accidents or being severely injured in these catastrophic accidents. Delilah's Law, which I am a huge proponent of, and we've seen a ton of social media, a ton of news media now covering this question. When people are dying at the hands of illegal, undocumented immigrants, we have to take a pause. And for years, we've said, we need more truck drivers, get them in. And then men and women and children start dying. And you have to do something. And now the rest of the country is looking at the driver's seat and saying, who are these men and women that are delivering things across the country? The FMCSA, as we've talked about before, they fought this issue recently. They had the interim final rule on non-domiciled. That got overturned. They have the final rule on non-domiciled. They're already being sued for that. But Delilah's Law is the codification of a movement that we've seen from our FMCSA and from the Trump administration. We want people in this country that are safe and operating the equipment the way they're supposed to, and we need them to be documented. That is a critical component of what we're going to see with Delilah's Law. I am curious to see your perspective. How massive of a change could this ultimately be?
It would be, like I said, I think it's the most significant. RXO CEO, Drew Wilkerson, who I've talked about some, he's a personal friend, but he's also, runs the third largest freight broker in the country, has said that what we're seeing right now in terms of regulatory change is the most significant thing to happen since deregulation. And this was before Delilah's Law was introduced. And he's talking about the non-domiciled CDLs. He's talking about the government crackdown. And I think we've talked about a lot of reasons for this, but ultimately we have a security and safety crisis backed by an economic one at the same time. And all three of these things are really pulling on the same strings. That's why this is getting so much momentum. It's the economic crisis in the industry that's actually driving the momentum. And that's why normally when there was, a lot of regulations coming into an industry, the industry would be pushing back because they wouldn't want it. Mm-hmm. But in a situation where we've had this massive economic travesty happening in the trucking industry due to this glut of capacity, there's a lot of support for these types of laws. And so if we look at the impact of what Delilah's Law could mean, and there was a great post done by Noel Perry, an economist, posted this on the J.B. Hunt website back in October, basically said that if these administration actions in terms of regulatory and compliance, and he actually updated it from 600,000 truck drivers could be eliminated from CDLs to 800,000.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Where he gets that is he looks at everything from English language proficiency violations to non-domiciled CDLs to unregistered immigrants to undocumented. And I think what's really important is that when we got the non-domiciled final rule, it was initially teased, when the government initially put it out there, it was a 2-year phase-in period. And they reversed it to a 5-year phase-in period. Obviously, friends of the show and our diehard trucker friends were pretty angry about that because they wanted a more aggressive phase-in. They wanted it immediately. And that just isn't, it was impractical to think that the DOT was going to pull off an immediate deal and not cause massive disruptions. I think you have to sort of understand that government is going to move slowly. Although Donald Trump doesn't seem to move slowly. He decides something and then bam, we got 15% tariffs because he decides 10% is not a good for the last show.
100%, absolutely.
But I think most times in government, there is a proper phase-in period. And I think this is also probably gives it much more likely to stand in a court system than doing something abrupt, because that is going to be, you're going to have sympathetic judges if you do something so abruptly that it causes massive damage to businesses and the economy.
And then to build off that with the FMCSA, we've talked about this over and over again. They don't have enough resources to do their current mandate, let alone big implementation of new policies. And so the phase in from 2 to 5 years, I think factors in that they don't have that kind of bandwidth to do those type of massive changes. But the federal government, Congress passing a law, if they need resources, they can get the resources. And so this is going to be...
Matt, let's talk about why. So, the DOT can issue rules and guidance and basically it can do its thing. But when Congress does something, it's such a bigger deal. It's much more profound. We'll talk about from a legal standpoint why that is so much bigger of a deal than the DOT doing something.
Yeah, so it goes back to administrative law, and I will have to say the rumors are true. I am having a refrigerator delivered right now, and so for everyone who hears screaming and dog barking, it is normal, I think, when a fridge gets delivered. So I will just make sure we have that caveat.
Does not sleep.
It doesn't. It's got to move. It's got to get in here. White glove service. They're going to install. I'm so excited.
Who's the carrier?
It's a private fleet for the folks who distribute it. So it's a company called ABT out of Chicagoland. They are delivering KitchenAid. So I'm very excited for this.
Are they domiciled or non-domiciled?
Oh, these are W-2 employees. These are domless. These are the real deal. The real deal. Now, what I'll say is when you talk about administrative law, like the DOT or FMCSA, their power is from a statute that Congress passes. And they have a very rigid process of proposing rules, seeking comments, getting feedback, making final rules, and then people can challenge those rules under a whole lot of different ways. When Congress decides to act, when the voice of the people, the branch closest to the people of our country decide to act, they don't have to go through any of the formal processes of rulemaking and comments. They make a law. And so we have watched for years the federal government and legislative branch give up power to the executive. But when Congress acts, it is far more powerful. And even more importantly, if a new administration comes in, it is far harder to unwind past regulations than it is when you'd have like just an administrative agency saying, oh, here's our new rule. When the law of Congress is passed and the president signs it, that is there for the long haul. So this is exactly the kind of thing we see. In law, we call it codification, when you take something from some other branch and say, we're going to make a bill in Congress. So this is the strongest way to pass this type of legislation. And if it passes, God willing that it does, this is going to be a huge benefit for a lot of truckers and maybe for people on the roads generally. It might mean things cost more. So that's the other side of this coin.
I've gone down that. I want to talk about inflation for a minute because this comes up a lot, particularly on social media, where somebody who really doesn't know anything about trucking responds, "Oh, great, it's going to be higher prices," and it's a normal reaction for people. It's not as significant looking at the data. Even if we doubled freight rates, which I think is quite possible if this were to pass, you're talking about less than 1% impact to CPI, because trucking as a service is less than 3% of finished goods prices anyways. And so by the time it ends up in consumers, ends up impacting consumers, it's, you have all the marketing, retail expenses, you have all the markups there. It gets absorbed in all the sort of follow through prices. And trucking, if you go back to pre-deregulation, transportation as a percent of GDP, or trucking as a percent of GDP is like 12%. Mm-hmm. It's now around 3%. And so it's just it is not a significant thing. And I've asked some economists and they say, at probably the upper end would be around 1% sort of impact. And nobody wants more inflation. Nobody wants higher prices. But I would also argue that either we're going to tolerate an environment where companies that are non-compliant, that we don't know who's driving our trucks, regardless of what you think about immigration, we don't know who's driving the equipment and driving across our highways in these trucks. We don't know who's hauling our supply chains. We don't know who's going to military bases. We don't know who's delivering products. Do you remember during September 11, the fear was that somebody was going to pull up a 53 trailer to a Walmart and blow it up or a shopping mall? Or
there's going to be a container with an explosive in there at a port and shutting it all down. Absolutely. We talk about this ad nauseum.
For those that have been in freight for a long time, you probably remember the education campaigns the industry did about if you see something, say something. And I remember there was a couple of times when I was in freight, much closer to the front lines, if you will, or I was in air freight, which is the most sensitive sector when it comes to security. And I remember there was a couple of times that we had suspicious behavior of there was something that happened, and we were at the DFW airport and we reported to the local police or the airport police because it felt weird. Now this was right after September 11. And so anything that felt suspicious, you're on edge about, because there was a fear for many, many years that someone was going to blow up a shopping mall with a 53-foot trailer. And that is when we go back to this idea that we don't know who's driving our trucks because we don't know who these people are is a foundational issue, not to mention all of the safety issues. And it is absolutely true. And I've researched this, is that the accidents on a per mile basis have doubled in the last 15 years. Fatal accidents.
That's right.
And that is basically the National Highway Safety Council, the independent agency that tracks safety, have said that heavy duty accidents on a per mile basis, and that is despite the fact that Anti-lock brakes are there.
All the new
Trailer
safety.
side guards are in. Eaton Vorad collision avoidance systems. Automatic transmissions. Things that should make it safer. And I think you look at the track record of a lot of the larger fleets, for the most part, the high quality fleets, their records are better.
Yeah.
But there's a clear delineation in the industry. Not every big carrier is great. In fact, there's some really bad actors, and we've reported it on FreightWaves, and you could easily go look at the data. It's the usual suspects, if you will. It's interesting. It's not as, Swift gets a bad rep, but when you actually look at the data, they're not actually.
It's a scale. They're just big. That's the problem.
They're big, and they hire a lot of training fleets, and they do dumb stuff. But that's beside the point. The reality is that what we have is a crisis because we don't know who's driving our trucks, and we have a safety problem combined with this economic problem, which is why I think this law will have a lot of momentum in Congress, where in a normal environment, if we didn't have this economic crisis and the freight recession, I don't think there would be a lot of sympathy.
Yeah, I to go back to like when the FMCSA put out their final rule on the non-domiciled CDLs, they highlighted the deaths of dozens of Americans from drivers who were not legally in the country. And to your point, it's more dangerous now than it's ever been. Even though the equipment is better built, has more safety features, all of these things. 5,000 Americans are going to die this year. 5,000 Americans died last year in truck-related accidents. And if you want to value human life, you have to take seriously the regulations of how you deliver freight safely, on time, and undamaged. So this movement, this moment in time where the President of the United States, the Secretary of Transportation, the FMCSA, and now members of Congress are looking at the industry and saying, how long has it been this way? Are we all satisfied with this? And when we first started the show, Craig, I remember mentioning that this is the supply chain we deserve. And I think we deserve a better supply chain. I do. And this type of regulation is exactly the recipe or the treatment that we need. But it will not stop at non-domiciled CDLs. There's a lot of work to be done. And as more members of Congress and more regulators peel back the onion of our industry and see all of the things that are there, my hope is that we're going to see more changes that will hopefully keep more Americans safe as they go about their days moving from place to place, as these giant 80,000-pound machines are hurling by them with people who presumably are well-trained and well-rested.
So let's talk about what Delilah's law is, because I think this is really, really important that everyone understands what is being proposed by the gentleman from Indiana.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so I mean, I have the law here.
Tee up, brother. And I'm researching this. By the way, I'm looking at this for those that are like, why is Craig not paying attention? I'm not texting.
Well, we're editing this part out. They're just going to see who's ever speaking. So people, this is the best part.
I thought this was interesting because there's 5,000 fatal accidents a year with heavy duty trucks.
That's right. That's right.
Do you know how many people have died in airliners since the year 2000?
Oh, I do not know. Does that include?
And these are commercial aviation accidents since the year 2000. We've had less than 4,000 people have died, where we have 5,000 people a year dying. I mean, it is basically stark. Now that's if you include September 11.
Yeah.
Here's interesting. Go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
So one of the things, also just kind of the caveat I will mention to the 5,000 fatalities involving heavy duty trucks and trailers, for everyone who's listening to us, that does not mean a finding of fault on the part of the trucking company. That is, a truck is involved in a catastrophic accident. So it could just be someone fell asleep and smashed in the back of a trailer, didn't realize it, and they died, and the truck is involved in that accident. So the reports you see from the FMCSA and from NHTSA, just keep in mind it doesn't necessarily mean the trucking company was at fault, but it's still a lot of people dying. And that's just the people who are dead. There are tens of thousands who are injured and they are maimed in catastrophic trucking accidents doesn't mean they're dead. But when it comes to Delilah's law, I'm going to read this piece verbatim because this is the actual piece of the legislation. It's a 10-page bill. There's no doubt, Craig, it'll get workshopped. There's things that'll be modified, but the hope is that members of Congress will sign on. They'll add their own thoughts. Industry will weigh in and we'll have a better version of this over time. But this is basically disqualification based on the lack of citizenship, lawful permanent residence, or work visa status, and says the secretary shall disqualify from operating a commercial vehicle for life of an individual who operates a commercial motor vehicle in the United States while that individual is not a citizen or lawful permanent resident of the United States or a non-immigrant described in subparagraph E2, H2A, H2B, and section 101A15 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. So this law, again, is very reminiscent of the final rule on non-domiciled CDLs put out by the FMCSA just a short time ago. But this administration is very well known for fighting things on multiple fronts, flooding the zone and saying, okay, we're going to shoot it for the FMCSA. We're going to have Congress propose an act here too. And the president calls it out in the State of the Union. So my feeling is we are seeing a trend that is not going to go away. And even if we see a change in Congress over the next next election cycle, I don't think this issue goes away. This is not a Democrat or a Republican issue. This is an American issue about people coming to the country illegally and moving freight unsafely. And ultimately, we need to have enforcement. And again, if Congress passes this, they'll have the resources to enforce this.
Of course they will. I just think this is astounding as I go into it, because I'm a pilot and I love airplanes. And I think about the safety record of the airline industry. And it's just interesting because I asked this question to Grok about how many people have died. Just let me give you some stats here, just to show you how serious we take our commercial aviation industry safety record and how reckless we are with our trucking safety record. And do you remember right after September 11, where there was the TSA was unapologetically profiling people? But here's the crazy thing. There have been a total of 600 fatalities since the year 2000 in commercial aviation, 600 total. There were 2,600 deaths basically on September 11, including the buildings that were blown up. We are having every single year 2 equivalent September 11s happen on American highways due to the lack of safety in American trucking. The public should be absolutely outraged. And the amount of bullshit we have to deal with. Sorry, Sirius XM. You need.
I didn't know we could swear. I didn't know.
I don't know that we're allowed to on XM, so I'm probably going to get banned by the Federal Communications Commission. But anyways, it is BS. The amount of BS that I have to go through to get on a commercial plane. Like, I have to have a real ID to get on a commercial plane. You know, in some airports, or at least I think they've changed it, you had to take off your shoes. You get patted down. They profile you. The amount of effort we put into protecting commercial aviation is so, and that's one of the reasons that the FAA has such an astounding great safety record. By the way, an astounding fact about the FAA is something like 82% of the employees that work in the Department of Transportation work for the FAA.
Wow. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It is insane how much money we spend on protecting our air service and how little resources and money we protect our trucking industry. And if these were, terrorists going down and blowing up trucks and killing 5,000 people on the highway, you better believe that there would be a massive lockdown happen across the country. And that is what we're talking about, is knowing who's our drivers, knowing what they're doing. They are so critical to our supply chain, and ensuring the safety and compliance of our industry. All these rules that we put around hours of service, ELD monitoring, drug and alcohol monitoring. We should know who the drivers are.
It's the fundamental question that I think many Americans assumed we had the answer to, which is, who is the driver? Where were they trained? And what is their safety record? And we have such little information on these things. And to your point on like commercial aviation, that is an industry that cannot have the public lose confidence in it. Like
No.
the public must always believe that these planes are well maintained and they're safe. And that means that you have to maintain them well and you have to make sure they're safe. If you look at interstate bus companies and the fatality rates that they saw in the 60s and 70s versus what they see today, it's a very similar story that we're talking about for commercial aviation. These people are generally in the buses safe. They have great drivers. They're not using the same kind of problems we see on the interstate roads for freight, but freight doesn't complain. That's the challenge. We push freight regulation to a place where we're not really, we assume we're going to self-certify, everything's going to be hunky-dory, and then you pull back the layer and you go, there are tens of thousands of American deaths at the hands of drivers who are not qualified. So this is the change we're seeing.
Matt, here's the craziness. When I get on a commercial plane, I accept the risk. And we all know people are scared to fly. I think you have said you're not.
I'm super scared of flying.
Which, if you knew statistically that you are more likely to die crossing the street, just FYI for you, than you are to die, than you would die in a commercial plane. But when you get on the plane, you accept the risk of getting on a commercial airplane. You know that risk exists. It's very, very, very small. When you get on the highway, you don't think about that risk.
That's right.
But the risk on the commercial airplane is you basically are accepting that there's a risk, but you're not in control. The difference is when you get on the highway, it's not just about the pilot. It's about all the things around you.
That's right.
There is a high degree of probability that someone that you know within the next couple of years will have a serious accident caused by a heavy-duty truck on the roads. It's statistically, that's what happens. And that is why the government cracking down on this immigration story is so pervasive, because it meets their economic goals, it meets their social goals, and they're able to talk to the public about safety. But I talk to people all this about why is this happening. People just don't know about how unsafe the trucking industry is. And here's the crazy part. There's been so much attention and focus on safety and how safety, all these initiatives by the large motor carriers and the ATA and these associations, because they know that lawyers that, on the opposite side of the table are always trying to paint trucking as a very unsafe industry.
That's right.
And the problem is we have not educated the public on, frankly, how unsafe some of the trucking industry has become.
Absolutely.
It is a Mad Max environment because we don't know who's driving our trucks.
Hopefully South can put into this, as we're talking, that video of the truck going the opposite direction on a highway. And I know many of my friends who are not surprised. We're not surprised because people can't read and write English. Why would they have to do that? And you don't see planes doing that opposite thing all that often.
Dude, if you don't check in, if you violate an airspace, if you're not checking in with air traffic control or you change an altitude, you can lose your license.
Absolutely.
They'll give you a phone number, and I've certainly had my share of phone numbers.
Call this number when you land.
No, that's exactly. I was in Jacksonville, Florida, and I was at a very busy airport, and I misunderstood a command from air traffic control, and I took a runway when I wasn't permitted to take it. I thought I was permitted. I thought that the instruction was, but I misunderstood it. They had a strange language because it's a military, in addition to a commercial airport, there's a military base at the Jacksonville airport. I misunderstood the command. And I had to go through a whole committee. All I did was go to the runway. There was no plane coming. It wasn't like there was a near collision or anything like that. I just took the runway when I wasn't authorized to take it. And I had to go through a bunch of processes to prove that I was competent as a pilot. And that is the type of seriousness that the FAA takes over airline safety and aviation safety. The fact is we do not take the same level of safety towards the trucking industry. And the fact that this driver that went the wrong way, or a driver can be out of service one day and immediately get a trucking license or not lose his license, but go to another company is a travesty.
And this is what Delilah's law said to stop. I mean, if they find you violate this, you are banned for life in the United States from driving.
That is an important. I did not know that.
Yeah, you are banned for life.
About this law, like deeper, what does it say? So it says that you have to be a natural citizen. Mm-hmm. You have to have lawful residency and be lawfully employed. And you have to have a very strict set of visas. By the way, I've looked these visas up. I mean, some of them are obvious, but one is a investor visa. I'm going to be honest. There are no investor visas, which you put it's an undescript. I looked up what the investor visa was, and there is no number, but the United States is not issuing investor visas to truck drivers. No offense to truck drivers. These are people that put $10 million in the Goldman Sachs account to open a business. That's what we're talking about. And
absolutely.
There may be a few drivers out there that could pull that off. Like they're not hauling over the road freight.
Absolutely. A lot of these are agricultural visas that have been around for a bit.
There's the agricultural visa. There's the so there's the H2 and the is it H1 and H2?
Yeah, H2A, H2B, and then the E2. But like, I'll read this. This is the
E2 is the investor visa, which again, not going to be applied in this situation. No offense to our truck drivers. You're not hauling general freight if you are on an investor visa.
And this is like back to that mention about like whether you violate the law and then you can come right back. I mean, this is from the statute or the bill. The secretary shall, it is not permissive, shall disqualify from operating a commercial motor vehicle for life an individual who operates the commercial vehicle in the United States with all these different, like if you don't meet these criteria. So the secretary, you are disqualified for life if you violate Delilah's law. That you couldn't be happier with that. And I think what I want to really emphasize to the folks who listen to this, if you're new to trucking or you're new to the facts of trucking, here are some other things that we're going to get to eventually in this administration, I suspect. The 8th most dangerous job in the world, in the country, actually, the 8th most dangerous job in the country is driving a truck. Like that is the 8th most dangerous job per OSHA. If you look at the vehicle maintenance, 22% of all commercial vehicles are unsafe at any speed. So again, you would never see that in aviation. You have systems that back up other systems. In trucking, you have one system and it fails and you just keep going. And then you get pulled over.
You have to have an annual inspection or 100-hour inspection. So if you put 100 hours on that plane, that's got to go into maintenance.
Absolutely.
And if you're a private pilot like I am, I'm required to do an annual. If you're a charter operator or an airline, they have a certain hour requirement, 100 hours or 200 hours or whatever that is. I actually don't know what the airline rules are in terms of how often it has to be in maintenance. But there is a requirement on how often that aircraft is used. And I can tell you, if you violate that and the FAA comes and inspects it, they will shut down your certificate. They will pull the certificate. And there have been cases in history where the FAA has come in and actually grounded airlines. I think ValueJet years ago got grounded. And it was after that horrific accident that happened in the Florida Everglades. They grounded ValueJet for not having proper compliance. And I think there was a one in Seattle as well, where a float plane crashed and it had not. And so there are periodic groundings of aviation companies, airlines included, because they have not met certain safety records. And what they'll do, and they just did this with the MD-11, the MD-11 crashed, the UPS crash, horrific crash. They found, these were airplanes were 30, 40 years old. They grounded the entire fleet because of a concern that happened in one accident that could happen to the entire fleet. 2 people died. And I'm not in the, 2 pilots died and some people on the ground. Not dismissing that at all. But if we had the same level of attention in terms of safety, we tolerate an unsafe trucking environment. We tolerate it.
Absolutely.
And we do nothing about it.
I'll use the example of the annual inspections because this is a piece I think a lot of the folks in freight know how freight moves, but they don't necessarily know the equipment side of things, like what has to happen with the equipment. So under the FMCSA's regulations, every year, a truck and trailer must be inspected by a mechanic. And the question of who is that mechanic? So many companies have their own mechanics that they train and they make sure they're certified. A lot of people use outside mechanics, third-party mechanics, and those mechanics self-certify that they are capable of doing that inspection. They say they've met the criteria under the FMCSA. There is no FMCSA training school for mechanics. You don't go to the government to learn this, and the government is not doing these federal inspections on your equipment. It is a for-profit business, or it is your own people. And so if you have these inspections happening, again, once a year, there's no requirement to do more. Some states require more, but most of the time they just go by the federal standard. That should tell you why you see 22% of commercial vehicles fail. You could never have an airline with even remotely like 2% or 5%. You'd never have it. We have accepted this because the American people do not understand how their grocery stores have groceries. All they do is they go to the store, and if it's there, they buy it. If it's not there, they don't get to buy it. But when you look back and say, who are the drivers? What's the equipment? What's the safety record? You're going to see that this industry is rotten and requires a radical transformation. And the Trump administration and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Transportation and the FMCSA administrator see this, and they're making moves. And that's what gets me pumped because, man, I spent my early career as a defense attorney for trucking companies in catastrophic accidents. I have seen enough pictures of dead and dying people in my lifetime. I don't need to see any more of that. I would love for people to get home in the same condition that they left. And that is a simple thing to ask for. But in this industry, it's nearly impossible at the scale of problems that we're seeing every day.
And if I wanted to become a mechanic to work on an airplane, I have to go to get trained. I have to go, I believe it's every year or every 2 years, I have to go recertify that I have been trained. If I'm flying an airplane and I'm a private pilot, like I'm a private pilot, so that means that I'm not flying for hire, I'm just flying around for fun. Every 2 years, I must sit down with an instructor and demonstrate proficiency. I must show that I can do all, and there's a checklist that he must sign off, and he has to demonstrate proficiency. There's like a whole spectrum of CFIs and FAA inspectors. They have to demonstrate proficiency to another person that is certified. And I can tell you that is why aviation safety record is so much better than what trucking is. And I think, there's going to be people hearing this conversation and drivers are going to be very offended by the fact that you and I are non-truck drivers and we don't know what we're talking about. We're just arguing the stats. And the reality is, like, if you are a commercial driver, and yes, it is a pain to put your truck into it's probably expensive to go to a certified facility. Mm-hmm. It is to get recurrent training would be a pain. I can imagine how angry the American trucker would be if you said that they had to get recurrent training. But Absolutely. The reality is that this is a demonstration of safety. And you can look no further than how safe our aviation system is to know that there is a playbook on how to create safety regulations. And look, every pilot has a problem with the FAA. Just like every trucker has a problem with the FMCSA, right? Like we all do. Like if you're, and I'm a pilot and I have a problem with the FAA. But I cannot argue with the statistics and the safety record of the FAA. I cannot argue with it. It gets the funding from Congress. It reports to the DOT, but it actually gets the funding, the appropriations comes from Congress because Congress does not trust the Department of Transportation to dole out the dollars. They say, you got to go in front of Congress. And it's a massive, massive bill. My point is that there are things that we could adopt from the aviation industry, which physics, if you think about the physics of an airplane, it's pretty remarkable that you can have a 300 or 400,000 pound thing lift off and defy gravity.
I think it's magic. I do.
It is magic created by God. It's physics, and it is so amazing to watch. And it is tremendous that we have made that safe. That we have, and just like people are scared to get on it, but it's because of the training. It's because of the technology that exists in the airplanes. It's because of the maintenance. They have to tear my engine up to basically every single time they do an annual, they have to go and look at the engine to make sure that the engine isn't going to fail in the middle of the air.
How long does an annual inspection for a plane like yours take?
My tiny little single engine, think of it as Cessna, is what most people would be familiar with. It's not a Cessna, but think of it as a Cessna. Takes 2 to 3 days. Like it depends on the backlog, because there is a backlog. And look, I think there's an argument the stuff that we're talking about is impractical probably to go to the extremes that the aviation industry does. In fact, the annuals is something that actually has a bad rep in the aviation community, because actually accidents increase right after, and I've had this happen.
Because you tear it all apart and you put it back together.
After an annual inspection. I had a situation where the mechanic that worked on my airplane put the wrong size fuse in my gearbox. So when I retracted my gear, I noticed it said in transit, it failed. And I didn't know what was going on for a bit. And I was texting my instructor from a guy that was an instructor about, hey, what do I do? And he's like, go look at the fuse. And it was the fuse. He'd reversed the wrong fuse size. And, I was in a situation where I would have landed on my belly and the fuel tanks are below it. It wouldn't have been fun. Luckily, anyways, it didn't happen. But you do see maintenance accidents that happen after annual reviews, because they basically tear the plane apart and put it back together. Anyone who's ever built a Lego set and then your kids break it. I built this one for my daughter. It was like a Disney princess little castle thing. And of course, she's 5, so she broke it. And then she wanted me to put it exactly back together. And I'm like, there are no instructions. And that's the problem, is trying to put something back together that is a problem. So I'm not saying we have to go that far. But I do believe that there is more that we should do to protect the industry. I do believe standard maintenance inspections should be required. I do believe that drivers should speak the language, should know how to read the signs and understand the language and be able to speak proficiently. I do believe we need to know who's in our trucks, because we need to know that they have followed. I do believe that the entry-level driver training program, which doesn't get enough attention, frankly, that was the worst decision and rule ever passed in trucking, because it meant that any moron could create a trucking certification and charge $500.
Get it done in a couple of days, you're ready to go.
Watch a YouTube video. It completely changed everything. And all of those things have created an unsafe environment. And so the fact that the federal government is looking at these things, I think we should all be super, super happy with and super proud of, regardless of what your view is on immigration. The fact that we have attention on these safety issues should mean that we are moving in the right direction in terms of trying to make trucking safer and more profitable. And look, everybody, and this is the thing that gets me about the ATA. I don't understand their arguments about the driver shortage. I get that they want a bunch of people coming into the industry because they want to be able to have a whole new crop of people that they can recruit from different demographics and younger ages and 18 to 21, all that argument. I get all that. I get why they do it. But if I ran the ATA, and I have no desire to run the ATA, I would tell
put your name
people,
in. We can put your name in.
Please don't. I have no desire to ever do that. I would tell people we have too many drivers.
Yeah, well, of course.
Get rid of them.
Absolutely.
And that is the difference right now, is they finally have caved, by the way. I don't know if you've noticed.
Oh, yeah, they absolutely have.
They have caved, and they have said, hey, we need to get rid of these bad drivers. We don't have enough good ones. And I think everyone agrees with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, to back up a little bit on this driver shortage narrative, the goal of that story was to erode regulatory guardrails and to keep driver wages low. That, I mean, more meat for the grinder.
It's always interesting to sort of apply intent. And I've spent, a lot of senior executives at trucking companies. I know a lot of senior executives at trucking. I know some members of the ATA that sit, in primary positions. In fact, my brother, when he was running US Express, used to go to the ATA meetings. My dad's business partner was chairman of the ATA. And I think that's one of the reasons that I grind the ATA so much when I come out against them, because I'm not supposed to be going out against them, right? But I think if you look at the intent versus the reality is this is regulatory capture gone wrong. Is that the larger motor carriers that make up the ATA membership, and a lot of it's, I don't think people understand how the ATA's membership works and sort of the power structure works at the ATA, but the way that they charge fleets is based on a revenue threshold. And you know who has the revenue? It's not the truckload guys. It's not the mega truckload guys that are the predominant revenue. It's the parcel carriers like FedEx and UPS. Mm-hmm. It's the LTL carriers. These are much larger, much larger.
And more profitable, typically.
And far more profitable. In fact, when Yellow was going under, I always thought it was interesting that the Transport Topics, which is a division of the ATA, did not report. We were doing like 10 articles a day, and they would not report about Yellow's bankruptcy.
I was canceled because of that. I was going to be speaking on that topic in your home state, and the ATA and the local Tennessee Trucking Authority came and said, like, we do not want to have him talking about this. It was during the not the bankruptcy necessarily. It was right before the filing. I wanted to tell the story, and like, you don't get to talk about that. Like, oh, I found the holy cow.
Yellow was a big member of the American Truckers Association, paid a lot of membership fees.
Absolutely.
And so it's actually the LTL and parcel carriers that have a lot of power over ATA's funding, because dues are based on the size of the company. They have a whole, basically, and it's a lobbyist organization. So, that's how most membership organizations are, is where you pay based on some type of multiple and proportion. Truckload guys just don't have enough power to really set the emotion. But I think what the ATA, and this is sort of different, because I think if you listen to OIDA or you listen to the average trucker, they think it's the big fleets that are dictating issues at the ATA. I can tell you, because I know a lot of the mega trucking executives, right, is they are not bought into the ATA's agenda. In fact, there's a lot of tension between the mega truckload carriers. I'm talking truckload. I'm not talking about Old Dominion or FedEx. I'm talking truckload. Your Knight Swifts, your Warners, your CRSTs, your Yospresses. There's a lot of tension where they think the LTL guys are dictating the policies of the ATA. It's not the truckload guys that are setting the agenda. I'm not saying they're innocent, because they're clearly, the decisions and the support, they have been supporting some of these decisions to sell this narrative of the truck driver shortage onto the American public and to Congress. And I think what they expected was they need a crop of new recruits, because they look at how hard and expensive it is to bring drivers in, and they don't control the economic cycle of trucking. It's tough because as soon as the market picks up and you get higher rates, you have a problem finding drivers, and you got to create wages. And the problem is you can't pay significant high wages. This always gets asked, why don't trucking companies just pay a living wage or a much higher wage? The problem is that when you end up paying a high wage, you can't reverse those payments. You can't tell a driver, we're going to pay you $1 a mile, and then when the freight market collapses, you're going to pay him 50 cents a mile.
And there are people who still to this day want to see government come back in and mandate a minimum mileage fee. And it's like, you can't do that. It doesn't work that way. I
think it's a totally different topic for a different day.
Yeah, absolutely.
The reality is that the reason sign-on bonuses are used is because they incent short-term behavior, because the carrier, they can drive the sign-on bonuses when the market is good and pull it back when it's bad. And that's just the reality of running a trucking company. I'm not justifying the behavior. I'm just saying that is the way you run a profitable trucking company, is you have to have these business models that evolve. And that's the reason union carriers go under, because they have such rigid pay structures.
That's right. Every year, here's your increase, here's your bump.
And so I think what has happened, though, is that this constant move to deregulate the industry of, the ELD mandate was not deregulation, it was a regulation. Mm-hmm. And it was intended to say, hey, we want to know how many hours a driver is truly driving. But what they did as a back door is they allowed self-certification of the devices, because they thought, hey, this is going to help proliferate the devices and create new technologies. But what they didn't expect was a bunch of Indian and Pakistani and Soviet bloc former country founders and entrepreneurs that were going to get the great idea of creating software that could back into the ELD device to let it edit.
Absolutely.
So they created these absolutely perverse incentives that if you cheat, you win. And that is the first thing that went wrong. The second thing that went wrong in terms of this whole idea of a truck driver shortage was the entry-level driver training program that came out in 2022, which basically eliminated the curriculum and eliminated what it meant to be a driving school. And there were states that actually said, hey, the federal government's got this. I don't need to actually go out and determine who the truck drivers are.
They self-certified. They're fantastic. It's the best school in the country.
But we know that when there are people on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and YouTube advertising $500, get your CDL, and they're not speaking English, by the way.
That's right.
$500 to get your CDL and 2 days of training, when a normal truck driver, it should cost $10,000 and they should go through 10 to 12 weeks of training. That's what most of the best carriers require. We know when someone's able to do it in 2 days, that all they've done is they figured out that they can get away with it.
One of the interesting things we've seen as we've looked at this, the driver school issue, is that, obviously the law is you must be able to speak English, and that's been the law since the 1930s. But they are administering tests in languages that aren't English. And you go, that's an interesting thing. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what we had. And it's getting, to your point, it's getting modified as time goes on. But we did a lot of weird things.
The third thing goes back to Delilah's law. And I think this is perhaps the most important. But this all works together because, which is we created the non-domiciled CDL issuance. And the non-domiciled CDL issuance, the idea has been was as we talk about DOT regulations taking forever. I mean, this was just like the ELD mandate and the entry-level driver training program. These were 5 to 10 years in the making. Like, it wasn't overnight. But the non-domiciled CDL issuance was issued in 2017, the original language. It went into effect in 2019. And it originally was intended for people who lived in one state. It was actually a military. It was driven by the U.S. military. If you're at Fort Hood in Texas, but I'm a California resident, I could go into the Killeen DMV and get my CDL driver's license from the Killeen, Texas DMV, and I could be a CDL driver, yet I don't live in that state. That was the original rule. When it finally came out, what they did was they said, wait a second, if you're an immigrant, you should also have the right to earn a CDL. The governments, the states, should verify that you have proper employment. They did say that. What they didn't expect was that some of these local DMVs did not actually follow procedure. They didn't understand them.
And oftentimes the CDL lasts longer than your right to be in the country. And so one of the things when the initial interim final rule on non-domicile was, hey, every single year you're gonna have to go back and get this redone because we need to make sure you're still here legally. So a lot of the cases were people just overstaying their legal ability to be in the country, but the CDL was still good. Off to the races they go.
And that is the problem, is like once you have the CDL, until you get caught, you get pulled over. In fact, the DOT under Obama in 2016 instructed the states, the highway patrol and the way station officers, that you did not have to demonstrate as a truck driver, that the DOT could not put you out of service if you didn't have a work permit. They said, your job is not to deal with immigration issues. Your job is to do it. So an American truck driver who has a tail light out, and I know you're a fan of the maintenance stuff, but a tail light, like an innocuous thing. You'll argue how important that is, but I'll say it's not that important relative to the world of like other things. That driver could be put out of service, but heaven forbid that he's got a CDL but doesn't have a work permit and nobody knows who he is. It doesn't matter, and that's the big problem. And what's happened is that with non-domiciled CDLs issued to people we don't know who they are, combined with these entry-level driver training programs that could just CDL mill and just take in and produce people, combined with ELD editing, fraudulent editing of hours of service, combined with a massive influx of immigration that's taken place over the last 10 years, combined with organized crime figuring out how lucrative trucking is.
How fragmented it is.
How fragmented and how easy it is to steal, how easy it is to penetrate our industry, combined with human trafficking groups, which basically take people from impoverished third world countries and offer them the ability to go make a living in the United States, and they bring them in. They're not trafficking for sex trafficking. In this case, they're trafficking for labor trafficking. And there's so many documented cases of this. That is what has created this massive, massive safety and security crisis.
I think about Eisenhower building the interstate road systems and under the national highway system and realizing that the ability to move things across the country was absolutely national security. And we as Americans have forgotten that. We've forgotten that because we've been addicted to fast and cheap, and we never looked behind the veil of how things got there. And now we're seeing what actually is behind there. And to your point, ELDs that are being manipulated, truck driving schools pumping out people that are not qualified, drivers who are not legally in the country and not able to read the language of the signs on the road. And now we see that how things get to you is actually a part of our national security. And if we don't pay attention and make changes now, it is only going to make things worse as time goes on. So I am 100% with you as we look forward to 2026, not just the FMCSA and the Trump administration, but we see Congress taking these issues seriously. And if you violate Delilah's law when that gets passed, you are going to be banned for life. I couldn't ask for a better outcome. You want to come to the country and violate our laws? Great. You can leave and never come back. That is perfectly fine with me because we need this stuff to be fixed because there's other things still on the horizon we got to tackle.
And the issue goes back to the states, and there's been this argument between certain states and the federal government, particularly the Department of Transportation, where they believe there's an argument at the state level that the DOT has gone beyond its boundaries. It has overprescribed these rules around non-domiciled CDLs, and they don't have the right to basically do that. This has been litigated and is being litigated in court.
That's right.
Having a federal law makes it very hard to litigate it because now, under the Constitution of the United States, the same thing, it's the opposite of what happened with the tariffs, is that the administration overstretched its boundaries. So if we get a future administration, say an AOC, or Gavin Newsom comes into office and is elected in 2028, and I'm not advocating for that.
So I think you're going to run, aren't you, Craig? Like we're talking about that. That's part of the plan.
But anyways, if we get an administration that perhaps is more favorable to immigration, the fact that this law is on the books will make it very hard to overturn because they can't instruct the Department of Transportation to make a change. And that is the reason that it's important that it happens at the congressional level. Like you said, a law is passed and not at the DOT. The DOT is doing great things, but it's not going to stick if we don't get it into Congress. And that's why this is so important.
I have a question for you that's related to something we talked about a little bit earlier. I know we're getting close on time. So in the past 3 weeks, Craig, I have been to Las Vegas, went to Manifest, saw you there. I was in Washington, D.C. I saw Administrator Derek Bars and Deputy Administrator Jesse Ellison, great guys at FMCSA. Then I was in Indianapolis for ACT Research Conference. That was fantastic. I just got back from Jacksonville. I've been on a lot of planes. And people tell me, they say, Matt, the turbulence is kind of like potholes in the air. And I'm up there, Craig. I don't see any holes. So tell me why I shouldn't be panicking, because every part of my body wants to scream when it starts bumping.
Well, look, there's times when I get shaken up, and I know I know statistically, I know how the physics work. I'm a pilot, but I understand the feeling, because it's a jarring feeling, and the reason it's interesting. So real quick, potholes are actually far worse than turbulence. I just want to be very clear. Like potholes can damage your rims. It can cause serious accidents. There's a lot of really bad things that happen with potholes. I think the reason people say it is because it's a pretty transactional, planes do not fall out of the sky through mild and even moderate turbulence. They just don't. What causes a plane to fall out of the sky is that you lose what they call lift. In other words, that the aircraft has gone beyond its ability to basically stay airborne. And a lot of times it happens with the way the angles of attack happen. So what is happening when you're running? It's almost like a wave on the water. Think of turbulence more like a wave on a boat, where, when you're hitting the waves, you're bouncing up and down. The thing is, you can see it physically and it's there and you're on the other side of it. But if you get into a storm, that's where it becomes much more dangerous. And that's the reason weather is the problem. So if you get into turbulence and you're flying across the sky and you look out and it's blue skies, and by the way, the clearest skies are often the windiest skies and the most unstable, because the air, what happens is, and you look up and it's blue and it's beautiful and it's a beautiful day, you should go look at the winds because they're probably blowing really strong and there's a lot of air instability, because what happens when you have a really stable air, that's where smog and soot sit. Okay. And so you'll see these like really gloomy days in the summer or in the spring where you have a lot of pollen. And that haze is actually a sign of stable air, which is incredible. It's the blue skies and the really beautiful days actually is where you get a lot of the more turbulent days. And you do see a lot of turbulence around the clouds. But if you end up in turbulence and it's a patchy little fluffy cloud day, you should just know that's running on some waves. You're running a boat across the waves. You should not be worried. If there is a thunderstorm happening and you end up in turbulence, you might be a little bit more concerned. I wouldn't worry about it because at least on commercial aviation is that these guys are professionals, they're trained, their air traffic control does a fantastic job of watching weather systems. There has not been a major commercial accident that's caused by weather as far as, in decades, as far back as I remember. I think there was one that happened outside of Dallas in 1985, a Delta plane crashed through a pop-up storm. So but it just doesn't happen in America because of Doppler radar.
Yeah.
We're getting real technical here.
I love Doppler.
Doppler radar has made aviation so much safer. And now you have real-time weather. I have Sirius XM weather into my airplane. They'll love us, by the way, because I just gave them a shout out.
That's right. They adore us. The fans, they need more. That's the key.
I wish that they would say, Craig, we're going to give you a free subscription to Sirius XM.
We don't
weather.
Get that? I thought we did. Okay.
I wish. We're on the radio here.
That's right.
Shout out to the producers of our Sirius XM thing. You could hook a brother up.
We would
By the
love
way,
that.
Aviation subscriptions are like $1,000 a year. I bought a.
Wow.
It's not cheap, but it is a life and death thing as a pilot, because you want real time weather, because you get into a storm. Particularly when I'm flying at 10,000 feet. I'm not flying 40,000 feet over the clouds.
See, what I do is I always get the in-flight Wi-Fi so I can text my wife and tell her how much I love her and tell the boys, tell my daughters, I'm proud of them.
By the way, that day that my gear wasn't working, I've had two incidents where, so my gear wasn't working and I decided to text my wife, I love you.
Yeah.
Because I literally didn't know if this was the last time I did it.
Absolutely.
Big mistake, by the way. Massive mistake. Because she was freaking out. And now every time I go up, there's another time, the time I got in trouble in Jacksonville, Florida for taking the runway when I shouldn't have. And I fly and they give me the phone number when you land, call this phone number, which is no pilot wants to hear that. No. It's never a good thing.
They're going to give you the
I got
award.
it as I was leaving the runway, and when you're taking off, you're like focusing on getting to airborne. And I got to airborne. It was about probably 5,000 feet or something, 5,500 feet. And I text my wife, I'm in trouble. And you know this, Matt, because you've seen my text messages.
Yeah.
I don't write long text messages.
No.
I write very short bursts. I can write a conversation, but there's 30 text messages associated with it. That's just the way I write. So she only gets the I'm in trouble. And I'm climbing. And it's not until I got to Atlanta an hour later before she realized that I was in trouble because I made a mistake, not because I died.
Oh,
to make matters worse, my wife, who I love dearly, ends up calling the air traffic control, the tower, who was mad at me for violating
wrong with my husband?
Their rules and trying to find out what happened. And so it just made things so much worse.
Oh, so I guess the takeaway from this part of the conversation is when I'm experiencing turbulence, it's okay to text my wife. I probably shouldn't start crying and vomiting. That's the part I ought not to do.
You look like a lunatic.
And I might very well be a lunatic, but I'll pretend I'm not.
As hyper and as passionate you are, I don't think it would be a good look for all the other passengers. Well, Matt, look, I think this is an amazing conversation. I do think the bottom line on this is if this passes, we're going to see a massive, massive reduction. And I think the thing that I don't know if we buried the lead here, but this goes into effect in 6 months.
if it gets passed. So we have to get through Congress, both the House and the Senate. It's got to get to the president. It might have changes. We're going to follow the changes. We'll talk about that in the show in the days and weeks to come. But we have never had this much energy in the transportation industry to move legislation forward than we have with this right now. So this is the moment.
What is the over under, in your opinion, on this law passing?
So I think that's a good question. I would say it depends on if we get more co-sponsors. So if we get any Democrats that step across the aisle and say, I want to be a part of this too, what every member of Congress knows, I mean, we got into an election cycle, even if you're not up for re-election, it still is important to be thinking about this. And if you can find bipartisan legislation that touches around safety, just like we talked about with Corca about fraud and theft, this is the right moment to do this. And I think many people in Congress realize that America really does want the roads to be safe. And if we can prevent even a couple of deaths because of non-domiciled or people who are illegally in this country, it's worth exploring. So my feeling is, I'm optimistic, Craig. I think we're going to have it. I feel like this is a pretty good shot for this to pass.
So what should someone listening to our conversation today do if they want this law passed? What should they do?
Every single person who's listening to this, what you should do is contact your congressman, contact your senator. You can email them, you can write them, you can find them on social media. They are listening. And I'm telling you, even if 10 or 15 constituents reach out to a member of Congress and says, I want Delilah's law to be passed, they'll listen to you. So that is the main takeaway. Go out there, reach out to your Congress people and say, I want this law to be passed. The more they hear from their constituents, the better likelihood it is for them to want to either co-sponsor or simply vote yes on the bill.
And by the way, one last point, and I'll say this because I know it to be a fact. The largest mega carriers, the ones you would assume do not want this, absolutely want this.
Yes.
And I know that because they've told me, the CEOs have told me that this is important. They want this to happen. That momentum is really important. They understand the safety, security, and economic crisis our industry is in. So the best thing you can do is to as an industry, support them. And this is a thing that we can come together to really do. And like you said, go out and reach out to your congressman, particularly senators right now, and then your local congressman, because that's where the action will be.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for being a wonderful co-host for Freight Expectations. I know everybody out there is just asking, why can't we have more? And we're going to continue to deliver this on time, undamaged for your listening pleasure, because ultimately freight is all the things all the time. And we have two people that unfortunately can't get out of the business, no matter how hard we might try.
We got diesel in our blood, Matt.
And some DEF too, it seems like.